Hi, this is CK with today's advice for life. And this is another video in my public speaking series. And today I want to talk briefly about the importance of having focal points. And what I mean is, you don't want to go into a public speaking situation in which you are memorizing things. You just memorize everything. You got to organize it in your head more like focal points, okay? I gave the example in my first video in this series. In which I spoke to a group of teachers at a church, and they gave me 3 hours, and I spoke for 2 hours and 45 minutes straight, no problem. I could have spoken for 2 more hours, but I didn't go in there with pages and pages of notes and things memorized. I had three focal points that I wanted to cover. And because I had a lot of experience, I had a lot of stories to share, I knew in my head that when I thought of the first point, that there were many things that I could talk about underneath that. So for example, when I was given this speech, I talked about three things that the author, John Maxwell, he's a best-selling author, and I learned from this. In fact, this was probably in the 80s or something. I listened to a cassette tape, or it was radio or something, of him speaking to a group of teachers, and I thought it was so insightful that I don't know, I just memorized it back then. It was always in my head, and I've always tried to operate by that. And those 3 points that he named was that, number one, he was talking to teachers, and his number one principle was that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so that was my first point. The second one was everybody wants to be somebody. And number three was everybody needs somebody. It's very simple. So when I thought of the first point, those are the 3 points that I knew that I wanted to talk about to these teachers. And when I talked about, for example, the first point was nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. It's all about a teacher caring. The number one attribute of a teacher should be that the students know that you care and you genuinely care for them. And so I have a lot of stories about my mistakes and successes in me as a teacher learning that. Sometimes I didn't care. Sometimes I just went for the content, just teaching the content and not so much caring about the student, the person. And I have stories on after I learned my lessons and I really did care about the students and what happened to especially one of these students whom I really cared about. And this kid was just rebellious, didn't listen, this kind of kid, and a story of his turnaround. And so I had stories of those, and on and on. The second point was everybody wants to be somebody. That means nobody wants to say, I want to be a failure in life. Everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to do things. And so if we know this about people, if we know this about human beings, we as teachers, our job is to help them, to encourage them to discover those talents, those natural abilities and skills and things in them, those passions, and help them develop that, help them have dreams, and help them, accomplish them and reach them, achieve them in life. And so we want to be those encouraging people. And again, I got stories about that and some of those teachers who did that for me, and then me as a teacher doing it for other students, and so on and so forth. And then the third focal point was, for me, everybody needs somebody. Nobody does it by themselves. We always have people who believe in us, people who help us, people who are our mentors. And I have many stories about people who have helped me, teachers who have helped me, and mentors who have helped me, who have taught me. Some of these mentors and teachers were people that I knew in person. Some were through books, authors, some were through radio, some were through and other things. And there are stories about, and then how I became a mentor and a teacher to many students, and then how I helped them and how I encouraged them and how I believed in them and how that affected them, and so on and so forth. And so those 3 points were all I needed. I didn't need to have, because I lived it, because I experienced it, because they were all part of me. I just had to think through how many stories did I want to share. So that's how I do public speaking. When I'm doing college prep, same thing. I'm just thinking in my mind, well, when I go out there, I'm going to talk about 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, okay, and all the processes, all the things that you need when you're in those grades, and what kind of things we should prepare for, what kind of things will happen, what kind of pitfalls you should avoid, and on and on and on, what kind of things you should prepare for, and how to prepare in each grade for college. And so in my mind, I know those are the 4 focal points that I want to focus on, okay? So you really want to pick out what are the essential points, what are the focus points that you want to focus on, and then under them, just have in your head examples and stories, case studies, data, whatever. Okay. Now, if you have the choice between just speaking and doing PowerPoint, I hate PowerPoint presentations because they're so boring. They usually don't require a lot of preparation. Teachers, they just do PowerPoint, 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 and they're like a robot. They do the same thing over and over. When you're doing public speaking, it really is about connection. So you gotta, improvise. You have to control your speed. You gotta, know when to say, when not to say, when to pause, when to look, and where to look. And so, you got to do all those kind of things. But I think it's most important that you don't sound like a robot. You don't memorize things, that you have certain points, certain focus points, certain essential points that you want to cover. And then you have to know how many that is. I recommend 3 to 5. If you have too many, you're going to forget. If you have 10 points, okay, and you don't want to keep looking at your notes. Point number 3 is you don't want to do it like that. So you got to seamlessly go right into the next point, and stories leading to stories, and going to right in the next point. And so, 3 to 5 is perfect. And like I said, just because you have a few doesn't mean that that's not a lot of material. Like I said, 3 points and I could speak for 3 hours, no problem. And it was the same thing when I'm talking in engineering, when I was an engineer, and if I'm going to explain something that I'm doing there, I'm picking up what are the essential points. For example, I was doing instruction work as a consultant one time for a national security agency at Fort Meade Military Base here in Maryland. And I chose one thing. And I chose just one thing, and I taught for 2 months. Okay, so there's one focal point. I taught it for 2 months. And I had exercises, I had stories, I had case studies. And I remember I was teaching a bunch of office administrators. And again, I had one point, and I just, and I talked about change. It was about change and how to handle change and how to adjust to change and what change was and why people can't adjust. What happens if you don't? But what happens if you do effectively? And on and on. And I taught for 1 month on just change. And so, for example, if you have a lot of content, if you have a lot of stories, a lot of examples in your head, you don't need a lot of focal points. So pick the few most essential ones and then talk about those in detail. Okay, so that's my advice for today. Be sure to go to my channel, click on playlist, and you're going to see 5 categories. You'll see college prep, career advice, parenting advice, money advice, and mindset for success. And you can click on any one of those categories and you can get my advice on that topic. So thank you for watching this video, and until my next one, I hope you stay well.